So, ladies and gentlemen of the DCU, it's been around, I think, a month and 1 week since we did our last DCU Chapter 1 Gods and Monsters discussion series installment episode, if you will. Now, I've taken a bunch of screenshots from your guys' comments. I have leftover comments and questions from the previous episode. Go check it out if you haven't done so already. But if you have, strap yourselves in for another 40-ish plus minutes of Boba DCU rambles with you guys. Feel free to get involved in that comment section down below. I love geeking out with you guys about this stuff. I would always appreciate it if you guys helped out the video by leaving a like. Double check if you're not subscribed, because a lot of you think you are. Maybe today is the day. The first comment I have today is from Prometheus Arrow, and I did this deliberately because I wanted to plug a video that you guys, not all of you, may have seen. So he says, Boba, like you said, with a lot of projects still to be announced in Chapter 1, which kind of projects do you think they will add? Personally, I would love a deep dive into the character of Green Arrow. And there's a comment there that I'm just about to read out, but I did a whole video not so long ago now of projects that I would like to see James Gunn announce for the rest of Chapter 1, Chapter 2. Granted, they're not all projects that I think will absolutely be announced. Obviously, that's hard to predict anyway, but I would still point you in the direction of that video. Like, these are 10 projects that I really want to see come to the DCU, and some of them I think kind of low-key could be announced. Now, as for the reply to this, I just wanted to, this isn't like calling this person out or anything, I just wanted to make sure that you guys are aware, because I guess not everyone is, or just thinking that I'm saying things without actually having done the research into it. So what I mean by that is Kenji Sparks, it says, I don't know about a lot of projects, referring to what I said in the previous video. They continue to say, that's not what Gunn said. He said there were still a few projects for Chapter 1 he hasn't mentioned. That could be 2 or 3. While Kenji there is technically correct with James Gunn not quite literally saying a lot of projects, you know, still yet to be announced, I say it that way because there is still quite a few, or quite a lot of projects still to be announced for the rest of Chapter 1. Now, I disagree with Kenji in saying that it could be 2 or 3. I still stand by saying quite a lot of projects left, because when being asked, and here's a screenshot to prove it, I have always got my James Gunn receipts. This user here back in March asked James Gunn about how much of the Chapter 1 slate did you tell us about? And he replied saying less than half. So far, we've had 10 projects announced. You're probably seeing them on screen right now. 10 brand new projects to kick off Chapter 1 in the DCU. That is less than half, which, you know, if you do some math there, implies that the entirety of Chapter 1 will have at least 21-ish plus projects in it before we get to Chapter 2. Because, once again, just to lay out the plain obviousness of this, 10 projects announced so far, that's less than half. That means at least 11 are coming our way to complete Chapter 1. So that is why I ultimately say with a lot of projects still to be announced in Chapter 1. Because, yeah, I think 11 more projects is quite a lot. And then we get onto Chapter 2. And don't forget that the 8 to 10 year plan is just 2 chapters. There's no Chapter 3. There's no Chapter 4. It is Chapter 1. We've had half of that announced so far, or less. The key word being less than half. We've still got quite a lot to come to complete Chapter 1. And then we get a whole phase of Chapter 2 projects for the last several years of the DCU. Now, the next 10, 11 projects of Chapter 1 that are still yet to be announced could be in any form. Like, for example, an animated movie, an animated TV show like Creature Commandos, an actual live action show like Lanterns or Booster Gold, or, of course, a movie like Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, Superman Legacy, Brave and the Bold, The Authority, etc. There's a lot of things they could play with regards to the final 11-ish projects yet to be announced for Chapter 1. So up next, I'm going to read out a couple of different comments, 1 or 2 that go off of what I was saying with regards to, we've been wondering what exactly the legacy in the title of Superman Legacy means. So Peter NYE6936 says, I feel like the heroes are the villains. I really think it's more along the lines of what Boba was saying about a Kingdom Come type Superman. He's young and he's out there seeing these heroes taking matters into their own hands, and he has to create some kind of moral hierarchy, which ultimately leads to the Authority who completely reject that, and in response, team up. I also have a feeling that Guy Gardner will die in the film, as Lanterns was described as a buddy cop show. This, to me, somewhat insinuates that only two Lanterns, Hal and John, will be in that, unless Guy Gardner is a Chief Lantern and Hal and John report to him. I'm fine either way, to be honest. Love to hear people's thoughts, and if you want to add or tell me what you think differently. So I wouldn't call it like I feel like the heroes are villains. I wouldn't say that. I get what you mean by that. You probably meant it loosely. It's just that Superman will kind of set everyone on the true straight and narrow with the whole legacy part of the title. It's all about Superman's legacy. And yeah, somewhat maybe establishing a moral hierarchy there for heroes to follow. And that's where the Kingdom Come theory comes in, of what we've repeated before. Without Superman being around for a long time, lots of new waves of metahumans came about and were, yeah, can you just imagine if a lot of people had metahuman powers in today's world? You wouldn't have everyone act like Superman. Some people might still try and fight crime, but they might be like the boys, they might be like the Authority, and that would cause a lot of problematic things to happen in discourse amongst people. Some people would agree with it, being like, yeah, man, get him by any means necessary. But like, can you imagine how out of control that could get? You would need someone to come in like Superman and be like, this is how we play it by the book. You don't cross this line. You are right about Lanterns being a buddy, somewhat cop show, or like a true detective thing has been described by James Gunn, of Hal Jordan and John Stewart stumbling across this ancient, terrifying mystery, as it's also been described, and how that somehow affects the greater overarching story of the DCU, which I'm still dying to know about what that really means. But in terms of you saying somewhat insinuates only two Lanterns will be in that show, James Gunn did say there would be other Lanterns peppered in there. So that could be liaising with other Lanterns in space, since they're on Earth, Precinct Earth. Or you could argue, yeah, Guy Gardner will survive. Nathan Fillion will maintain his role in a few DCU projects and won't die in Superman Legacy. But you could be right about that, but you might not be. We don't know. I wouldn't want Guy Gardner to die straight away, for him to be introduced and just tossed away like that, especially when fans are even debating, should Guy Gardner be Nathan Fillion's age or that casting, older from what we can assume, and I'm pretty sure will be older than Hal Jordan and John Stewart. But we do have another comment here which really fascinated me with regards to this whole legacy talk that we're having here. So RCB Mines 4579 says, I think there's still a good chance Clark's been Superman longer than the other heroes announced, except maybe Guy. Hawkgirl's actress is much younger, and Kendra is too. Michael Holt could still be a scientist billionaire helping Superman, like Camille Hamilton or Leo Quintum. Meanwhile, Corin Sweat's Clark will be 30 years old, as confirmed by James Gunn. While Reeve and Cavill started at 30 and 33, that's because Reeve trained at the Fortress for years, while Cavill stayed an anonymous hero for years. In modern comics origins such as Birthright, Secret Origin, and Men of Steel, Clark either became Superman soon after college or was already Superboy as a teenager. This Clark could be 5 to 7 years into his career as Superman and as a reporter, assuming he starts at 23 to 25. But of course, the JSA could have existed decades before in the 40s, and like Doomsday Clock, their influence on young Clark could be an emphasis. His beliefs in truth and justice could have come from them. Also, the JSA had the original Green Lantern, Alan Scott, Hawkgirl/Woman, Shiara Saunders, and Mr. Terrific, Terry Sloan, except for Metamorpho. All the announced characters are legacy characters. Interesting to note. Clark being a JSA and possibly comics fanboy could also be similar to Barry being a Jay Garrick and comics nerd. The Justice League, the return of old school ideals and superheroics could be Superman's legacy. Now, I think that is one of the best kind of, theories or proposals out there I've heard with regards to how to flesh Corin Sweat's Clark out in this world with regards to the title of Superman Legacy. And something I didn't really think about before, aside from Metamorpho, the new castings are very likely the legacy versions of the characters. So like Eddie Gathegi, Mr. Terrific, is Michael Holt, not the actual first Mr. Terrific. Now with Hawkgirl, don't get me wrong, her comic book history does get a bit convoluted with regards to, this is probably a legacy version of Hawkgirl as well, and likely Kendra. I don't think she was actually named as Kendra in the casting from Isabella Merced, just Hawkgirl, whereas Eddie Gathegi's Mr. Terrific was stated to be Michael Holt. But regardless, regardless, I say the whole Hawkgirl thing gets a bit complicated because even though Shiara has been known as Hawkwoman, she's also been known as Hawkgirl as well. So that's what I mean. It goes a bit all over the place with Hawkgirl. But the main point here is, yeah, Superman Legacy, funnily enough, a lot of the characters of whom are Superman's metahuman compatriots, as James Gunn puts it, could be legacy characters in the world in where heroes have existed and do exist, as James Gunn also says. So I really dig that. Now, I'm not sure if this really is what the title was all about because, you know, it's not like Superman Legacy. It's not like Superman himself is a legacy character of a previous Superman, and we know that Superman Legacy has absolutely nothing to do with any children of Superman's. We're not quite there yet. For all we know, Superman, or should I say Clark and Lois, are just barely dating. We've got a whole 8 to 10 years to mature that relationship. But as what RCB gets into here, with a universe in where heroes have existed in the past, they've been around for a long time, superpowered individuals, super villains, it would be so cool to incorporate RCB's idea here in how legacy isn't just a one-dimensional meaning in this movie. Sure, it can apply to the legacy characters that we've talked about, possibly Kendra's Hawkgirl, Michael Holt's Mr. Terrific, Nathan Fillion's Guy Gardner as a Green Lantern. Technically, there's been other Lanterns before him. But also, legacy could mean the other heroes that have influenced Clark Kent to also bolster on the legacy that he is going to. So adding on to my original theory of how the Superman legacy part will be Clark's new moral kind of compass influencing others maybe, but how it can go even deeper with RCB's comment here of how, let's just say, he is a really big fan of the JSA in the past, and we all know that Clark Kent was raised good and well by Jonathan and Martha Kent in Kansas, but he's also had the good influences of the JSA, and that in of itself is a legacy that ideologically was bestowed upon him, and how those heroes handled things in the 1940s and how he approaches the scene maybe in this new world where the world hasn't really been used to Superman for so long. Because as we know, this is a Superman who's not an origin, but he's not a veteran. Now, one thing I somewhat maybe disagree with here with RCB, now I'm not saying you're wrong because this could actually very well be the case. The middle portion of the comment where we get into maybe some of the more modern comic influences, such as Birthright and stuff like that, I don't know if this Clark will actually be 5 to 7 years into his Superman career. Now, I'm not disagreeing with you because that could very well be a thing. Now, what you said about how David Corenswet's Clark will be around 30 years old, as confirmed by Gunn, to anyone who's wondering about that, that is basically correct. James Gunn said that Corenswet's Superman will be Corenswet's age. So at the time of filming, 31-ish as a Superman. So if you do want to get into the source material there, I can't outright deny what RCB is saying here, because Superman, kind of similar to Batman, sometimes Batman starts as young as 25, and if you want to go by that, if I want to go into a whole Batman tangent here, Batman in the DCU could be 10 to 12 years into his career and still be a mid-30s, 36, 37 or so year old Bruce Wayne. So Superman, if he's 31 during the events of Superman Legacy in the DCU, canonically, as James Gunn has basically told us, Superman could have started several years before that. But I just don't know. I kind of like Superman. This is where my own bias, I think, is affecting my discussion here. I like the idea of Superman being max 4 years into his career. Okay, maybe let me adjust that. Max 5, 3 to 5. 3 to 5 would be good, but I still prefer 3 because we'd be picking up in the movie and where Superman has literally been seen across the world, not for just 5 months, not for 10 months, not just 1 year, not just a year and a half, not just 2 years, but 3 years. But not too long in where it's like, oh my God, okay, that's Superman, I don't care. He's still very new in the public eye, the public discussion, the public discourse about this Man of Steel who seems to be so much more powerful than maybe other characters the world has come across before. Whereas if he's been operating for 7 years, I know this is a world, as James Gunn puts it, where heroes have existed and do exist and will exist down the line into the 8 to 10 year plan, heroes that we won't even know about for a while. But I think the film is more alluring to me at the concept level if David Corenswet's Superman is also not battling the public consensus about him. I don't need another kind of BVS intro there, like with what Snyder was going for with Henry Cavill. But I think it's really attractive to me that Superman has got a name, people know about him. But I like if anyone saw him or anything happened, it would make major breaking news because it's like, hey, there's that Man of Steel again, that Superman that's been referred to maybe in an article or two over the, well, more than an article or two over the past 2 or 3 years. But do you get my point? I feel like I'm rubbing that in quite a bit, but my point is, I feel like there's a lot more fascination with a Clark Kent Superman who hasn't quite proven himself to the world. And I feel like that is still around 3 to 5 years in, or more specifically 3. But if we go with your example here, 5 to 7 years, he's been around for 7 long years. I just feel like there's a lot of things that we could have missed there. The world probably has seen a lot to do with Superman, and he probably has been up against quite a lot. That I'm not saying there isn't cool and new stories that you can explore with a Superman, David Corenswet Superman, who's been doing it for 7 years. But I don't think it's as immediately as fascinating as he's only been around for like 2 years, 3 years, something like that. Do you see what I'm saying there? I hope I'm articulating that right. But I still have a feeling that he would have been doing it more mysteriously throughout his 20s until he was finally ready to show himself to the world. I don't know if they're going to completely take the Cavill approach, though. That's something I do want to differentiate in terms of David Corenswet's reasons as to why he might have not revealed himself to the world for a long time. With that, as you know, he went into the scout ship and then he kind of found the suit, and then, before that he was looking for purpose. I think with Corenswet's Clark, they could do a similar thing to the comics and how maybe from the pod he's always had access to something like the Fortress of Solitude, well, from a certain age that is, and maybe he's been slowly testing his limits to the world, and where for Clark Kent with Henry Cavill's version, he was more of just, going around the world, finding himself, finding that purpose, and then there was the scout ship discovered, and it kind of just fell into place like that. So maybe they could do the Superboy-esque mode for Corenswet, not like pure comic style and where he was literally 17 going around the world as Superboy with a red S, but he was doing that throughout his 20s till he honed his skills enough and became confident enough to perhaps reveal himself to the world. I don't know exactly how that will go down, but I also don't think they're necessarily going to go modern comic book page and where, during college, right after college, he's been flying around as Superboy and he's been seen here, there, and everywhere, and he's then, graduated into Superman that way, and that's why he's been Superman for 7 years already by the time we pick up with Superman Legacy. I prefer it still to be older, but that doesn't negate that he hasn't been doing lots of things out there during his 20s. It just took a long time to mold that. He still went to Metropolis, he still got the reporter job, and alongside that, his Superman side was taking shape when it was being molded up until the point of when he was like 28, 29, then he became Superman. Fast forward to the actual movie's events, maybe he's been Superman for 3-ish years. But that's just my personal want there. Let me know if you guys down in the comments below do agree with how Superman could have actually been Superman for around 7 years. Legacy is probably going to be a multifaceted somewhat thing, but I do love the Jay Garrick kind of inspiration to Barry Allen analogy you gave there, because Clark being a JSA fan, and how I also said in my top 10 projects I want to see announced for the DCU video, because we're getting a Paradise Lost prequel, I basically said, well, after you've established the DCU, like for several movies, we're not going to go straight into a JSA prequel, but eventually, 10 plus projects into the DCU, eventually in the rest of Chapter 1, or maybe even as a Chapter 2 project, you could do a project that's a prequel in the 1940s of the JSA, and we get to see this world and where superheroes have existed and do exist in present day. But how about we go back to the have existed part? What did the DCU look like in the past. So that would be really, really, really cool. And I think this idea could be a potentially true way of how legacy appeals in the meaning of this movie to maybe even Clark Kent being inspired and bringing back the somewhat old school ideals of how to be a superhero, from the way he looked at Starman and, Jay Garrick's Flash and other JSA members. So up next from Morgie39, she says, do you expect any or all of the movies announced to be the first of trilogies for the characters, or do you expect Chapter 1 and 2 to just have a collection of one-offs? That is a really good question, because whenever I have been asked this, I've been like, I actually don't know the answer to that, because traditionally, what we have had is trilogies, like Guardians 1, Guardians 2, Guardians 3, Thor 2, Thor 3, Spider-Man 1, 2, 3, etc., etc., etc. And with the DCU, are they really going to do, Iron Man 1, 2, and 3? And I don't know. Maybe you would have to think so in one way, because I had this pointed out to me when I did my projects, my top 10 projects I want to see announced in the DCU. And out of those 10, even though there's going to be way more than 10 announced in the DCU's future, I didn't really mention a proper sequel. But I do think that is the way maybe it could be done. We are getting Superman Legacy, and I have no doubt that there's going to be another somewhat focused Superman film in the future of the DCU. But I do wonder if they won't be as linear necessarily as what we've had it before in other cinematic universes. So I'm not exactly saying how technically a sequel to Man of Steel was Batman versus Superman, but I am saying in how, well, if we do get like a world's finest movie with Batman and David Corenswet's Superman, or some kind of Trinity movie and where you see the continuation of Corenswet's story as well as Batman and Wonder Woman's, but that's still technically the next canonical story event that happens with that character in a movie that is only containing a few characters, but isn't necessarily a solo movie for that character in the same way Superman Legacy was. Even though, having said that, Superman Legacy is going to feature other characters, other heroes, like his metahuman compatriots we've spoken about quite a bit in this video. So I do think eventually you will still maybe get a Superman movie, but it might not be called like Superman 2. I always think that James Gunn's DCU won't have titles like that, like Wonder Woman 3, that a lot of people would seem to be calling it. Whatever the next Superman project could be after Superman Legacy and after what he might pop up in another movie, I think it will go like that. We have Superman Legacy, we have some other movie or two or TV show on Max even, in where he can fly in and fly out or have relevant roles, but the next main continuation will still be something like Superman subtitle, insert subtitle here, like Man of Tomorrow, or some other title like Legacy, but, still has a meaning that could be interpreted a bunch of different ways. But I guess to not beat around the bush there, I think, having just heard myself speak, I'm still eventually talking about a sequel of some kind. I think maybe what I'm trying to articulate here is that it won't just be as straightforward or typical as what we've had before. I think maybe they want to avoid the whole, okay, so we're getting Swamp Thing, we're going to do Swamp Thing 1, 2, and 3, and 4. We're going to get Superman, we're going to do Superman 2, 3, and 4. And, it's just going to be a series of events repeating like that with whatever character. Booster Gold? Oh, okay, Booster Gold 1, 2, 3, and 4. But ultimately, this is kind of a hard question to answer. With the way of looking at it, with the latter of what you're saying, or just a collection of one-offs for Batman, Superman, and other big characters, I feel like if the DCU is successful enough to go on for 8 to 10 years, as they plan to do, there's just no way. There's no way they're just going to do one-off movies with big characters. So that does imply sequels, but I've got a good feeling that they're going to curate that universe in such a way in where it won't be seen as the stereotypical trilogy build up, if you know what I mean. I hope that they inject whatever continuation of Batman's story, Superman's story, Wonder Woman's story, Lantern's story, or whomever insert character here in an organic way that feels as though whatever follow-up feels almost like a one-off in a certain way and relevant to explore that character at the time. Obviously, it's a business. They want to make money as well, but they also don't want to completely copy the formula of previous cinematic universes as well. I think it's all in service, as James Gunn has said, of the story, the characters, the universe they're building, the overarching story. So I have no doubt we will get sequels. I just think it will be done in a way that may feel a bit atypical to what is usually done when greenlighting other projects or sequels like that. But I would love to know what you guys think of this question down in the comments. Do you really think it would be straight up, okay, Superman Legacy 2, Superman Legacy 3, I mean, different subtitles obviously or whatever, or do you think it will be still, of course, we're going to get other movies and not just one-offs with those characters, but they're going to aspire to somewhat break the traditional mold of just Superman 1, Superman 2, Superman 3, Superman 4 in a universe that is meant to really be organically cohesive and just be this really fantastical, living, breathing DC universe. So up next from LI Overtime says, do you think Gunn is setting up a Terrifics project considering he's already cast Mr. Terrific and Metamorpho? If so, could you see Plastic Man and Phantom Girl being cast in Superman Legacy in the future? That is, I think, the question right now, because, you know, when this first happened, when we heard that Eddie Gathegi is playing Mr. Terrific, we have Isabella Merced playing Hawkgirl on top of Lois Lane, obviously, on top of Clark Kent, Corin Sweat, on top of Perry, on top of Jimmy Olsen. We know that so far this is the cast. People are thinking, okay, well, yeah, it does seem to be somewhat of a Terrifics lineup, so granted that James Gunn got those castings in right before the strike happened, so that's why we kind of got, oh, Anthony Carrigan as Metamorpho. Oh my God, we've got Eddie Gathegi, we've got Isabella Merced. Does that mean after the strike is kind of over, he still intended to announce more heroes? Maybe. But I do think that might rub people the wrong way, because they'll be like, so again, with what people were originally criticizing with this news, how is this a Superman movie? And I do still stand by Gunn in where you can have a Superman movie in a living and breathing DC universe, in where there could be a threat or whatever the heck's going on, in where other heroes might get involved, as long as it is still executed organically. So with that said, could other heroes be in it? Yes. But I'm still 50, I would say I'm 50-50 or like 60-40 on that. 60 maybe against believing it, only because just because Metamorpho and Mr. Terrific is in the movie, that doesn't mean that the Terrifics are all going to be in the movie. For example, when we eventually get that Terrifics project, of which I would like to see, maybe it's the case of him where there's a theory in how, what if Metamorpho is created in this movie? And, you know, whether he's created and he's kind of freaking out initially, and maybe he could be somewhat of the antagonist in the plot, but a reluctant one, because, you know, by the end of the movie, maybe he uses his powers for good, as per the heroic Metamorpho goes on to do after initially hating what he's become. That's when the initial Terrifics team starts to form, and then they go on to incorporate Plastic Man. They go on to meet Phantom Girl, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Phantom Girl's going to be in this movie as an already established Terrifics team with Plastic Man as well. I think it could just be Mr. Terrific, Metamorpho, those two, you know, get to know each other. They start the team, or they don't even acknowledge it as a team, but again, organically, maybe even if there's a Terrific show that is greenlit or a Terrifics movie, the rest of those threads could come together. And again, the Terrifics is then, as per the movie title, the team that is founded in the movie. But hey, I could be wrong about that and what you're saying there. If so, could you see Plastic Man and Phantom Girl being cast in Superman Legacy in the future? Yeah, they could be. Maybe Phantom Girl could be left for just the Terrifics project or movie, but Plastic Man comes into Superman Legacy, and then you already have 3/4 of the team there, and that's when they maybe go into the dark multiverse and find Phantom Girl in the Terrifics project. I don't mind Mr. Terrific already being a hero, or Plastic Man already being a hero, and maybe Metamorpho coming into this movie as an origin for him. But at least that way, even if some of these heroes are already active and have already been out there, they form the team, and we get to see that origin of them work together as the Terrifics. But as for if we're going to get them in the movie, it's anyone's guess. But the more characters that do get added, the less development you would have to think that some of them will get, and that could be a criticism of the movie if you kind of jam it with a lot of other metahuman compatriots, if you will. I do admit it's really cool getting to see other characters and the world building that comes with that. It's like, oh, you know, Michael Holt's been Mr. Terrific for X amount of time. He's already been doing this with his T-Spheres for years. But if we get that times like 4 or 5 more characters, it's like, oh, well, damn, we're definitely not going to spend that much time with them, especially when you've got to make Lois and Clark the main protagonists of the movie, of which James Gunn is insisting is most definitely the case, despite these other heroes being in the movie, let alone if we got even more heroes. So Jen Sithari says next, I think, and totally could be proven wrong here, that Mr. Terrific, Hawkgirl, Green Lantern Guy Gardner, and Metamorpho are the DCU's incarnation of the Terrifics. I think Clark will see them operating as a team, and perhaps that will lead to some inspiration for the formation of a certain more famous team that he'll be a part of. The DCU could possibly be a place at this moment where heroes have brave and bold team-ups and form groups, for example, Terrifics, the Authority, but has yet to see the formation of the actual league. So with the latter of what you're saying there, I do completely agree, just in terms of how I don't think the Justice League is necessarily a thing right now, but that doesn't mean that heroes, even David Corenswet's Superman, doesn't know of Batman. Maybe he's already met him, but he knows clearly, at least what we can assume with what James Gunn describes him as, like how can you really explore every facet of Superman's life in a universe that has had heroes and still has heroes without also showing him with his metahuman compatriots. So that shows that maybe they actually already know of each other by the events of whatever the heck is going down in Superman Legacy. But it doesn't mean that he's like, hey, do you want to be, I've got this idea about a Justice League, do you want to join? But he's maybe not needed or thought of that necessarily because he's Superman and he can kind of handle a lot by himself. But the more he interacts with them, the more we get those interactions and we see that familiarity and teamwork within the movie with whatever threat they're up against. Maybe that is Metamorpho. I know you're saying that maybe he's already a part of this team, but I do really like the idea that Metamorpho could be one of the somewhat threats, even if it's unintended, with potentially his creation. And it would be a really cool origin to bring him in the fold of the superhuman, metahuman compatriot group, because it's like, hey man, I know what you've got to deal with your powers is really tough, but how about we try and use them for good? So I'm still in the camp myself of the Terrifics aren't necessarily full-blown, and they still welcome Metamorpho in, and we kind of start to see the beginning formations of the Terrifics. So I'm not saying you're wrong here. I mean, even though you said you could totally be proven wrong, that Mr. Terrific, Hawkgirl, Guy Gardner's Green Lantern, and Metamorpho could already be a part of the team. I'm not so sure about that, but there could be semblances of teams already. I definitely do agree with the overall consensus of what you're saying here, of how, yes, I think there could be other lineups, other teams, but there's no full-blown league. Or maybe there hasn't been anything nearly as recognizable as anything since the Justice Society of America back in the 1940s. Maybe it's been that long since there's been truly a super metahuman team-up where people recognize these heroes truly fighting alongside each other. And this is also the approach I've said with regards to somewhat predicting future projects, and how there might not be a Justice League movie for a while, but what if there's a Trinity movie being the prelude to a Justice League movie? Maybe in that Trinity movie, things really, like the ball really gets rolling with the idea of the League at some point in the movie, but you still need this familiarity between Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman to get that ball rolling even further. Now, to entertain your idea of what if Mr. Terrific, Hawkgirl, Guy Gardner, and Metamorpho were already in a team, maybe that is the case, because one thing I will say, even though I'm not sure about them being the DCU's incarnation of the Terrifics, is that it does sound more believable to put it that way versus in Superman Legacy, Guy Gardner just happens to fly in, and so does Hawkgirl. She happens to fly into this problem, and, you know, we have Mr. Terrific happen to fly. I mean, technically, I guess you could argue with a big enough threat or whatever's happening, you could have other heroes just all kind of get involved and try and sort it out in their own way. So yeah, maybe I'm not wrong there, and I can't rule that out, but it does make it more believable automatically if you think, oh, these guys are already familiar with each other. Maybe they're not actually calling themselves the Terrifics, but they have teamed up before because they've just run across the same problems. I don't know. That's a tough one. But I most certainly agree with the broad consensus of this comment, in where there are formations of heroes out there who haven't quite had the inkling from maybe bigger heroes, such as what I think should maybe be the Trinity Project movie, in where everyone gets organized in this Justice League Unlimited esque sense. The Real T-Bear OG says, I wonder what the Lanterns will uncover in their show. I'm hoping it's something big, but I don't want the anti-life equation right now. We can do something else. Maybe it could be the Reach, and that's how they could tie in Blue Beetle, but who knows? So I'm always happy to open up the floor to you guys speculating about this. I mean, I agree. I don't think after just having somewhat, even though we never really got there with the anti-life equation in the Snyderverse, but bringing that into the DCU already, I just don't. I'd be very shocked if James Gunn went there. I really don't think that would be the case. Now, as for the Reach, I don't think so. I think maybe that was and is intended to be explored in a sequel, but I don't think James Gunn really intends to make this overarching plot for the DCU and all of its characters to be a massive war against the Reach. I think that could be somewhat still visited upon in a Blue Beetle project, depending if we get a direct sequel in the future, even though we're going to get Xolo Maridueña playing Blue Beetle again and popping up maybe as a supporting role. We don't know if we're going to get that sequel. But as for that being the overarching plot, I don't think so. Now, what else is there? Now, there are lots of things in the DC Universe on a very cosmic scale, whether that's the anti-monitor to, you know, the mother of the multiverse level kind of stuff, if you know what I mean. It could get like super deep there, or you can go like with Blackest Night, but then people are like, oh, they can't do Blackest Night already, and that's not to say that they would be. It could be like a 8-year drawn out teased kind of thing, if that makes sense. So it is so hard to know. That there's so many things I'm probably forgetting about right now with other threats, because don't forget that the DCU won't just be Earth. We're going like into space, you know, kind of how MCU is like transcended just New York City and then Earth and then into space. We're really gonna open ourselves up to the larger DC actual universe. DCU, DC Universe doesn't mean DC Earth. It means bigger things. So really, who knows what James Gunn has got planned? A lot of people have also entertained the center. You never know. But you've got to think that with all of these main bullet point ideas we're pitching here, it's got to be one of them. Or maybe, it could be one of the ones I haven't mentioned right now. But really knock your heads together in the comments, and I'll be looking for those in particular as to who give a really good theory as to what the overarching plot could be. And I guess I'm linking that to what this ancient terrifying mystery is, because James Gunn did say it will like go out into the overarching story of the DCU. So you have to think this could be our first Thanos-esque kind of big threat, whether it's an individual like Thanos or like a much bigger cosmic-y thing. That's going to be our first thing that is discovered with the True Detective like Lantern series with Hal Jordan and Jon Stewart. And I am so hyped about that. I'm so hyped for the Lantern show. So up next is from Walrus3383 saying, we know we are getting an already somewhat established Bat family in The Brave and the Bold, but just how established do you think the family will be? I think Dick, Barbara, and Jason are all very likely, with Jason probably being dead at the time the movie takes place. With the film being about Bruce and Damian's relationship, however, I feel like there is a chance that Tim could be left out, as Bruce already previously having 3 Robins may be daunting for general audiences who are not familiar with the source material. Love the channel, man. Keep up the good work. So I agree. I do agree that, as much as this universe will be very comic booky, authentic, that no matter what, as I always say, adaptations aren't always copy and paste. And yes, I do think it will be somewhat streamlined for the general audience. Not that I'm calling general audience members dumb, but I don't think we're going to have Dick, Jason, Barbara, or, Cassandra mixed with Barbara. Maybe that's another thing I'll talk about in a second. But then Stephanie Brown, but then, Damian Wayne, and then Tim Drake. And it's just like, that's, everyone there. And yeah, maybe Jason being dead, but like everyone. I don't know about that. I think it will be adapted in a way that's really cool, because it's like, holy shit, we've got a Bat family. Maybe Dick Grayson is already Nightwing, if not on the precipice of being Nightwing and leaving the Robin role, because Damian Wayne coming in could, really kind of springboard that. Who knows? It depends how they're going to do it. I definitely think that Barbara may have already had her time as Batgirl. I say definitely, but I'm not sure. I think Barbara could be Oracle. Killing Joke could have already been done, and that's if that's even being adapted. But I think Cassandra Cain is potentially a Batgirl, and Barbara is already in Oracle mode. Jason, I think, yes, it's kind of likely in the way I'm vibing this right now, like you. He has been a Robin, but he died. Now, that leaves room for maybe an Under the Red Hood story at some point down the 8 to 10 year plan. Who knows? That could be really, 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 really cool. But the question we now have is, okay, so you've got Dick Grayson. He's kind of on the precipice of leaving anyway and having his own thing going on, but you could do like a Son of Batman interaction there with his character alongside Damian's. You have maybe an existing Batgirl with Cassandra only if Barbara is in Oracle mode. Who do you still adapt there when Jason is dead? Maybe they can make it work with regards to how, okay, Dick Grayson was OG Robin, Batman Year 3. So by the time of The Brave and the Bold, he is Nightwing. Think Son of Batman style if you have seen that movie. So he had Jason. Jason died. Maybe they skip over Stephanie Brown. There may have been Batgirls in the past. Maybe there is one with Cassandra Cain. But specifically with regards to Robins, since Dick Grayson is Nightwing, and he still will be in the movie. Again, think Son of Batman-esque interactions there. And Jason's dead. Well, Tim Drake could still be involved and maybe not skipped over because he could be technically the only operating Robin with, well, Dick Grayson now being Nightwing, Barbara being old enough and, you know, advanced enough to be Oracle in her story, Jason being dead. So you have Tim Drake there. And that's when Damian comes in and you skip over Stephanie Brown's brief time as Robin. That could work. But the only thing I do get concerned about, and I think this is why this is something that gets talked about quite a bit when we all think about Brave and the Bold, is that when you have a big Bat family truly and utterly chronologically adapted that way, some characters will not have the development or screen time that I think fans will want them to have. So if you're doing a whole story about Damian Wayne, Batman's son, coming into the fold, you might neglect the current Robin, Tim Drake, maybe, and you might have quippy moments from Nightwing with Damian Wayne and stuff and whatnot. But yeah, they would have to be very careful with the way they spend their screen time and how each character is involved in the script. And that's why I think it's leading a lot of people to think that they might maybe condense the Robin lineup or the chronology within the DCU's Batman. But again, don't forget that you've still got an 8 to 10 year plan where even if they do change some things up chronologically, that doesn't mean that these characters won't eventually come in. But I definitely think, obviously, like Dick Grayson and Jason, all of that stuff will be kept super traditional with the chronology of how things go down there. And so, guys, after a long, fat ramble, I think I'm going to end this DCU Chapter 1 Gods and Monsters discussion series episode right here. So what I need from you down in the comments below, especially if you've made it this far, give me your thoughts, give me your theories on everything we discussed in today's video. I really, really appreciate you all watching. So if you did enjoy it, do consider leaving a like on this video. Do consider subscribing, as I said at the beginning. Double check that subscribe button just to see if you are actually subscribed, because maybe I keep popping up on your recommended and you think you're subscribed, and maybe today is the day you'll finally hit that button and actually be subscribed. But until next time, guys, just thank you so much for supporting the channel. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you, fellow DCU family, in the next video. Goodbye.